Millionaire helps crying boy on bench, years later, discovers how it changed everything. Alexander Reeves stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, gazing out at the glittering skyline of New York City. At 45, he was the epitome of success, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, with a net worth that placed him comfortably among the world's millionaires. His salt-and-pepper hair and tailored suit exuded an aura of power and influence that had become second nature to him. But beneath the polished exterior lay a man increasingly disconnected from the world around him. His pursuit of wealth had cost him his marriage, and his relationship with his teenage son, Jake, was strained at best. Alexander's life had become an endless cycle of board meetings, charity galas, and solitary nights in his luxurious apartment. On the other side of the city, in a rundown neighborhood far from the gleaming skyscrapers, 10-year-old Tommy Martinez huddled on a park bench, his small frame shaking with sobs. His worn sneakers and second-hand clothes stood in stark contrast to the sleek businessman striding past him. Tommy was a bright, resilient child, but life had dealt him a difficult hand. His single mother, Maria, worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads, leaving Tommy often alone and responsible for himself. Despite the challenges, Tommy maintained a love for learning and a dream of one day becoming a doctor to help people like his ailing grandmother. Alexander and Tommy's worlds could not have been further apart. Yet fate, with its penchant for the unexpected, was about to bring these 2 unlikely individuals crashing into each other's orbits. As Alexander left his office that evening, his mind preoccupied with the latest company merger, he decided to take a walk through a nearby park, something he hadn't done in years. He told himself it was for exercise, but deep down, he was seeking something to fill the growing emptiness he felt. It was there, on that crisp autumn evening, that he first saw Tommy. The boy was hunched over on a bench, his small shoulders shaking with each sob. For a brief instant, their eyes met. Alexander's, filled with surprise and a flicker of long-forgotten compassion. Tommy's, wary and filled with a pain no child should know. Little did either of them know that this chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world around them. Alexander paused, his usual brisk pace faltering as he took in the sight of the crying child. For a moment, he considered walking on. After all, this wasn't his problem, and he had an important dinner meeting to get to. But something about the boy's despair struck a chord within him, reminding him of his own son at that age. Before he could second-guess himself, Alexander found himself approaching the bench. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to keep his voice gentle and non-threatening. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" Tommy looked up, quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm fine," he mumbled, clearly anything but fine. "My mom's at work. She'll be home later." Alexander glanced at his watch. It was nearly 8 p.m. "It's getting pretty late. Do you live nearby? Maybe I could walk you home?" Tommy shook his head vehemently. No thank you. I'm not supposed to go anywhere with strangers." Alexander nodded, respecting the boy's caution. He sat down on the far end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. "That's smart of you. I'm Alexander. What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy replied after a moment's hesitation. "Well, Tommy, I can't in good conscience leave you here alone. Would you mind if I just sat here with you for a while? We don't have to talk if you don't want to." Tommy shrugged, which Alexander took as assent. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of the city a constant backdrop. Finally, Tommy spoke up. "My grandma's really sick," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom's working extra shifts to pay for her medicine, but it's not enough. I tried to help by selling some of my toys at school, but the principal said I couldn't do that." Fresh tears welled up in his eyes. "I just don't know what to do." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. He thought of his own son, Jake, and how he would feel if he was in Tommy's situation. The contrast between this child's reality and his own privileged life hit him like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry, Tommy," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's a really tough situation. You're very brave for trying to help your family like that." Tommy looked up at him, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Do you think so? Mom always says I'm her little man, but sometimes I feel so helpless." Alexander nodded. Absolutely. Many adults wouldn't handle this situation as well as you are. As they continued to talk, Alexander learned more about Tommy's life, his love for science, his dream of becoming a doctor, the struggles his family faced on a daily basis. With each revelation, Alexander felt a growing sense of unease about his own life choices and the disparities in the world around him. Just as Alexander was about to suggest they find a way to contact Tommy's mother, a frantic voice called out across the park. "Tommy, Tommy, where are you?" Tommy's face lit up. "That's my mom," he exclaimed, jumping up from the bench. A woman in a waitress uniform came running up, relief evident on her tired face as she swept Tommy into a tight hug. "Oh, thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. Why aren't you at Mrs. Garcia's?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Tommy said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "She had to go to the hospital to see Grandma, and I didn't want to bother you at work." Maria looked up, noticing Alexander for the first time. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked, pulling Tommy closer. Alexander stood, suddenly acutely aware of how he must look. An older man in an expensive suit, talking to a young boy in the park at night. "I'm Alexander Reeves," he said, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "I was just keeping Tommy company until you arrived. He was upset, and I didn't want to leave him alone." Maria's posture relaxed slightly, but wariness remained in her eyes. "Thank you," she said cautiously. "We appreciate your concern, but we'll be fine now." As Maria led Tommy away, the boy turned and waved. "Bye, Mr. Reeves. Thanks for listening." Alexander waved back, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within him. As he watched the pair disappear into the night, he knew that his life had somehow shifted on its axis. The dinner meeting he had been so preoccupied with earlier now seemed trivial in comparison to what he had just witnessed. With a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, Alexander turned and walked back toward the glittering skyscrapers of his world, knowing that nothing would ever quite be the same again. In the days following his encounter with Tommy, Alexander found himself unable to shake the memory of the boy's tearful face and the stark reality of his situation. The experience had opened his eyes to a world he had long ignored, despite his occasional participation in high-profile charity events. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and a growing sense of responsibility, Alexander began to research the neighborhood where he had met Tommy. What he discovered shocked him to his core. The area, once a thriving working-class community, had been decimated by factory closures and economic downturns. Unemployment was rampant, schools were underfunded, and access to healthcare was limited. The more Alexander dug, the more he realized that Tommy's story was far from unique. One statistic in particular stood out to him. Over 30% of the children in that neighborhood lived below the poverty line. Alexander, who prided himself on his business acumen and understanding of economic trends, was stunned that such dire conditions existed just a few miles from his opulent office. As he delved deeper, Alexander uncovered another troubling fact. His own company, through a series of subsidiaries and investment vehicles, had played a role in the area's decline. They had been part of a consortium that had closed down the largest factory in the neighborhood, deeming it unprofitable, despite its importance to the local economy. This revelation hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He had always justified his business decisions as necessary for growth and shareholder value. But now, faced with the human cost of those choices, he felt a deep sense of shame and responsibility. Determined to understand more, Alexander decided to visit the neighborhood again, this time in broad daylight. He dressed down in jeans and a simple shirt, hoping to blend in and observe without drawing attention. As he walked the streets, the reality of the situation became even more apparent. Boarded-up storefronts, crumbling infrastructure, and an atmosphere of despair permeated the area. Yet, amidst the decay, Alexander also saw signs of resilience. Community gardens in vacant lots, a bustling community center, neighbors helping each other with repairs and childcare. It was outside this community center that Alexander saw a familiar face. Tommy was there, helping younger children with what appeared to be homework. Despite the challenges he faced at home, the boy was giving his time to others. This sight stirred something deep within Alexander. He realized that he had been living in a bubble, insulated from the real-world consequences of his business decisions. The problems faced by communities like Tommy's were complex, rooted in systemic issues that went far beyond simple charity or one-time donations. As he stood there, watching Tommy interact with the other children, Alexander felt a shift in his perspective. He had always believed that his success was solely the result of his hard work and business acumen. Now he began to recognize the role that privilege and circumstance had played in his rise to the top. The boy he had met by chance in the park had unknowingly opened Alexander's eyes to a reality he had long ignored. He realized that with his wealth and influence came a responsibility, not just to make money, but to make a difference. As Alexander walked back to his car, his mind was racing with thoughts and ideas. He knew that he couldn't simply throw money at the problem and expect it to go away. The issues were too complex, too deeply rooted for quick fixes. For the first time in years, Alexander felt a sense of purpose beyond the next business deal or profit margin. He didn't yet know how, but he was determined to use his resources and influence to make a real, lasting change in Tommy's community and others like it. The journey ahead would be challenging, forcing Alexander to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and the system he had thrived in. But as he drove back to his office, he felt a determination he hadn't experienced in years. The revelation of his inadvertent role in the community's struggles had sparked a desire for redemption and a commitment to true social responsibility. Alexander sat in his office, staring out at the city skyline as he grappled with the revelations of the past few days. The contrast between the gleaming towers of wealth and the struggling neighborhood he had visited weighed heavily on his conscience. After hours of internal debate, he came to a decision that would alter the course of his life and career. He would use his position and resources to make a tangible difference in Tommy's community. The next morning, Alexander called an emergency meeting of his company's board of directors. As he stood before them, he could see the confusion and concern on their faces. This wasn't the Alexander Reeves they were used to. The man focused solely on profit margins and market expansion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm with conviction, "I've called you here today because I believe we need to fundamentally change the way we do business. We have a responsibility not just to our shareholders, but to the communities we operate in." He went on to outline a bold plan. The company would invest significantly in revitalizing the neighborhood where Tommy lived. This would include reopening the factory they had closed, with a focus on sustainable manufacturing practices and job training programs for local residents. Additionally, they would fund improvements to local schools, establish a community health clinic, and create a microloan program for small businesses. The reaction from the board was immediate and divided. Some members nodded in agreement, seeing the potential for positive PR and long-term benefits. Others were openly skeptical, concerned about the impact on the company's bottom line. One board member, Victor Hargrove, was particularly vocal in his opposition. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "We're a business, not a charity. Our responsibility is to maximize profits for our shareholders, not play social worker to every downtrodden neighborhood in the city." Alexander stood his ground. "Our current model is unsustainable," he argued. "By investing in these communities, we're not just doing the right thing morally, we're securing our future. A thriving community means more consumers, more talented employees, and a more stable economy overall." The debate raged for hours. In the end, Alexander managed to secure a narrow majority in favor of his plan, but he knew the real challenges were just beginning. The consequences of Alexander's decision were far-reaching and immediate. News of the company's new direction spread quickly, generating a flurry of media attention. Some outlets praised the move as a bold step towards corporate social responsibility, while others criticized it as naive and financially irresponsible. The company's stock took an initial hit as wary investors pulled out, concerned about the short-term impact on profits. Alexander found himself working around the clock, reassuring major shareholders and outlining the long-term benefits of the plan. Internally, the company was in turmoil. Some employees were energized by the new direction, seeing it as a chance to make a real difference. Others, particularly in the finance department, were resistant to the changes, worried about their bonuses and the company's financial stability. Alexander's personal life was affected as well. His son Jake, hearing about his father's decision, reached out for the first time in months. "Dad, I saw you on the news," he said during a phone call. "What you're doing? It's really cool. I'd like to hear more about it." This small olive branch from his son gave Alexander hope that perhaps he could repair more than just a struggling neighborhood. However, not all the personal consequences were positive. Some of Alexander's wealthy friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with his new focus on social issues. He found himself excluded from certain social circles and business opportunities. As the weeks passed and the project got underway, Alexander spent more and more time in Tommy's neighborhood. He worked closely with community leaders, listening to their needs and ideas rather than imposing his own vision. This approach, while more time-consuming, led to solutions that were better tailored to the community's actual needs. One afternoon, as Alexander was leaving a meeting at the community center, he ran into Tommy and his mother, Maria. The boy's face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Reeves, are you the one who's helping fix up our neighborhood?" Alexander nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "I'm trying to help, yes, but it's really a team effort. The whole community is coming together to make things better." Maria, who had been skeptical of Alexander's intentions at first, gave him a small smile. "We appreciate what you're doing," she said. "It's not often that someone in your position takes the time to really understand what we need." As Alexander walked away from that encounter, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for years. The road ahead would be challenging. He knew there would be setbacks, criticism, and moments of doubt. But seeing the hope in Tommy's eyes and the cautious optimism in Maria's smile confirmed that he had made the right decision. He realized that true success wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the positive impact one could have on others' lives. With this new perspective, Alexander was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he was finally using his wealth and influence for a greater purpose. As Alexander immersed himself in the revitalization project, a secondary plot began to unfold within his company. Victor Hargrove, the board member who had been most vocal in his opposition to Alexander's new direction, was not content to simply disagree. He saw Alexander's shift in priorities as an opportunity to seize control of the company. Victor began to quietly rally other dissatisfied board members and major shareholders. His argument was simple. Alexander's bleeding heart policies were going to run the company into the ground. In clandestine meetings and hushed phone calls, Victor painted a picture of financial ruin, positioning himself as the only one who could steer the company back to its profit-focused ways. Meanwhile, unaware of the brewing corporate coup, Alexander was facing challenges of his own in implementing his vision for the neighborhood. The reopening of the factory, while providing much-needed jobs, had also stirred up environmental concerns among some community members. Alexander found himself caught between the urgent need for employment and the long-term health of the community. To address these concerns, Alexander decided to partner with a local environmental group to ensure the factory operated with the highest standards of sustainability. This decision, while popular in the community, added significant costs to the project, further fueling Victor's narrative of financial irresponsibility. As Alexander worked to balance these competing interests, he found an unexpected ally in his son, Jake. Inspired by his father's new direction, Jake had begun interning at the company, specifically in the department overseeing the community project. His youthful idealism and tech-savvy approach brought fresh ideas to the table, such as implementing a real-time pollution monitoring system that could be accessed by community members via a smartphone app. Jake's involvement not only helped bridge the gap between the company and the younger residents of the community, but also began to heal the rift between father and son. Alexander found himself looking forward to their discussions, rediscovering the joy of connecting with his child. However, this positive development in Alexander's personal life was offset by growing tensions in the company. Employees were divided, with some embracing the new socially responsible direction and others resenting the impact on their bottom line. The finance department, in particular, was a hotbed of dissent, with rumors circulating about potential layoffs if the company's profits continued to decline. Victor Hargrove seized upon this unrest, positioning himself as the champion of the old guard who wanted to return to the company's profit-driven roots. He began holding informal meetings with key employees, subtly undermining Alexander's leadership and hinting at the changes he would make if he were in charge. As these corporate machinations unfolded, Alexander remained largely oblivious, his focus firmly on the community project. He was making real progress. The factory was nearly ready to reopen, the community health clinic was under construction, and the microloan program had already helped launch several small businesses. One of these businesses was a small bakery started by Maria, Tommy's mother. With the help of the microloan and some business mentoring provided by the company, Maria had been able to turn her talent for baking into a promising enterprise. Alexander took particular pride in this success, seeing it as a tangible example of how his new approach could change lives. But as Alexander celebrated these small victories, storm clouds were gathering. Victor's coalition was growing stronger, and he was nearly ready to make his move. The company's next board meeting was approaching, and Victor planned to use it as a platform to challenge Alexander's leadership directly. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine not just the future of the company, but the fate of the entire community revitalization project. Alexander, still unaware of the threat to his position, continued to pour his heart and soul into his work, driven by the belief that he was finally doing something truly meaningful with his wealth and influence. As the secondary plot developed, it became clear that Alexander's personal journey of redemption and his professional life were on a collision course. The question remained, would his newfound sense of purpose be enough to weather the storm that was about to break? As the weeks turned into months, the relationships between the key players in this unfolding drama began to evolve in complex and unexpected ways. Alexander's relationship with Tommy and his family deepened beyond that of a benefactor. He found himself genuinely invested in their lives, celebrating their successes and offering support during their struggles. He became a regular at Maria's bakery, not just as a customer, but as a friend, often spending time there discussing the progress of the neighborhood and learning about the daily challenges faced by the residents. Tommy, in particular, had latched onto Alexander as a sort of father figure. The boy's natural curiosity and intelligence shone through in their conversations, and Alexander found himself looking forward to their interactions. He began mentoring Tommy, encouraging his interest in science and medicine, even arranging for him to shadow doctors at the new community health clinic. One afternoon, as they sat on the same park bench where they had first met, Tommy looked up at Alexander with serious eyes. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "why are you doing all this for us? You didn't have to." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Because, Tommy," he finally replied, "you helped me see something I had forgotten, that we're all connected, and that true success isn't about how much money you make, but about the difference you make in people's lives." This growing bond with Tommy and his community had a profound effect on Alexander. He found himself smiling more, sleeping better, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The stress of navigating corporate politics and balancing budgets was offset by the joy of seeing real, positive change happening around him. Meanwhile, Alexander's relationship with his own son, Jake, was undergoing a transformation of its own. Working together on the community project had given them a common goal, a shared purpose that bridged the gap years of neglect had created. They began to spend time together outside of work, rebuilding their bond one conversation at a time. During one of their dinner meetings, Jake opened up to his father. "Dad, I used to think you only cared about money and success," he admitted. "But seeing you like this, so passionate about helping others, it's made me see you differently. I'm proud of what you're doing." Alexander felt a lump in his throat at his son's words. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure it out," he said, "but I'm grateful for this second chance, with the community and with you." However, not all of Alexander's relationships were improving. His friendship with Victor Hargrove, once built on a shared drive for success, had deteriorated into thinly veiled hostility. Their interactions in the office were tense, filled with passive-aggressive comments and barely concealed disagreements. After a particularly heated exchange over the company's new direction, Victor cornered Alexander in the elevator. "You're going to destroy everything we've built," he hissed, "and I won't stand by and watch it happen." Alexander met his gaze steadily. "The world is changing, Victor. We need to change with it. What we're doing now, it's not just right, it's necessary for our long-term success." The rift between them widened, setting the stage for the conflict that was brewing behind the scenes. In the community, Alexander's relationships with the local leaders were evolving as well. Initially skeptical of his intentions, many had come to respect his commitment and his willingness to listen. Reverend Jackson, a prominent community activist, had become one of Alexander's strongest allies. "You've surprised us, Mr. Reeves," the Reverend said during a community meeting. "When you first came here talking about change, we'd heard it all before. But you've shown us that you're here for the long haul, and that means something." These words of acceptance and support meant more to Alexander than any business accolade he'd ever received. As these relationships developed and shifted, Alexander found himself at the center of a complex web of emotions and expectations. He was no longer just a wealthy CEO, but a mentor, a friend, a renewed father, and a community partner. Each role brought its own joys and challenges, forcing Alexander to grow and adapt in ways he never had before. The man who had once measured his worth by the size of his bank account was learning to value himself by the strength of his relationships and the impact of his actions. It was a profound shift, one that would be tested in the crucible of conflict that lay ahead. As Alexander navigated these evolving relationships, he was unaware that the biggest test of all was looming on the horizon, one that would force him to choose between his old life and the new path he had chosen. The day of reckoning arrived with the quarterly board meeting. Alexander entered the boardroom, confident in the progress of the community project, unaware of the storm about to break. As the meeting began, Victor Hargrove cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with the agenda, I move to discuss a vote of no confidence in Alexander Reeves as CEO." A shocked silence fell over the room. Alexander felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He looked around at the faces of the board members, seeing a mix of surprise, sympathy, and in some cases, grim satisfaction. Victor pressed his advantage. "Over the past months, we've seen our stock price plummet and our profit margins shrink. All because Mr. Reeves has decided to turn our company into a charity. This is not what our shareholders invested in, and it's not what this company stands for." Alexander stood, his mind racing. "What we're doing in that community isn't charity," he argued passionately. "It's an investment in our future. We're creating a model for sustainable, ethical business practices that will set us apart in the long run." The debate raged for hours. Victor presented financial reports showing the short-term losses the company had incurred. Alexander countered with projections of long-term growth and stability. Board members took sides, some backing Alexander's vision, others swayed by Victor's promises of a return to high profits. As the argument reached a fever pitch, the boardroom door burst open. Jake rushed in, out of breath. "Dad, you need to see this," he said, turning on the large screen at the end of the room. A live news broadcast filled the screen. It showed the community where Alexander had been working, but instead of the usual scenes of urban decay, the streets were filled with people. Residents, community leaders, and employees from Alexander's company were marching together, holding signs that read, "Save our community," and "Reeves for the people." The reporter on the scene was interviewing Reverend Jackson. "This community was dying," the Reverend was saying. "Alexander Reeves didn't just bring jobs back. He brought hope. He showed us that big business can have a heart, that profit and social responsibility can go hand in hand." The camera panned to Maria's bakery, where Tommy was being interviewed. "Mr. Reeves believed in us when no one else would," the boy said, his eyes shining with determination. "He can't stop now. We won't let him." The boardroom was silent as the broadcast continued, showing person after person testifying to the positive changes Alexander's project had brought about. Jobs created, lives improved, a community revitalized. Alexander felt a lump in his throat as he watched. He turned to the board members, many of whom looked stunned by what they were seeing. "This," he said quietly, "this is what real success looks like. This is the future of our company." Victor sputtered, trying to regain control of the narrative, but it was clear the tide had turned. The board members who had been wavering were now nodding along with Alexander's words. In that moment, Alexander realized that the true climax wasn't in the boardroom at all. It was out there, in the community, where real people were fighting for a chance at a better life. He had started this journey thinking he was helping them, but in reality they had saved him from a life of empty success and moral bankruptcy. As the echoes of the community's support filled the boardroom, Alexander squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. The vote was about to be called, and with it, the future of not just a company, but a vision for a new way of doing business would be decided. In the wake of the dramatic revelation from the community, the atmosphere in the boardroom shifted palpably. The live broadcast had put a human face on the numbers and projections they had been debating, forcing everyone present to confront the real-world impact of their decisions. Alexander seized this moment to make his final appeal. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his voice steady with conviction, "what we've just witnessed is more than a show of support. It's evidence of the tangible change our new direction is creating. Yes, our profit margins have taken a hit in the short term, but look at what we're building: a loyal community, a sustainable business model, and a legacy that goes beyond mere financial gain." He paused, looking each board member in the eye. "We have a choice to make today. We can retreat to the safety of our old ways, prioritizing short-term profits over long-term sustainability. Or we can be brave, to lead the way in showing that businesses can be a force for good in the world while still remaining profitable." Victor, seeing his advantage slipping away, made a last-ditch effort to sway the board. "This is all very touching," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "but feelings don't pay dividends. Our shareholders invested in us to make money, not to save the world. If we continue down this path, we'll be bankrupting ourselves in the name of social justice." The room erupted into heated discussion. Some board members sided with Victor, arguing that the company's primary responsibility was to its shareholders. Others, moved by the community's display of support, began to see the value in Alexander's vision. As the debate raged on, Alexander realized that a simple yes or no vote would only deepen the divide. He needed to find a way to bridge the gap between the two sides. "I propose a compromise," Alexander said, raising his voice above the din. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. "We continue with the community project, but we set clear benchmarks for financial performance. If we can't demonstrate that this new approach is financially viable within the next year, I will step down as CEO voluntarily." This proposal sent a new wave of murmurs through the room. It was a risky move, essentially betting his career on the success of his vision. But it also showed Alexander's commitment and confidence in the path he had chosen. The board members huddled in small groups, discussing the proposal in hushed tones. Alexander waited, his heart pounding. He knew that everything he had worked for hung in the balance. After what felt like an eternity, the board chairwoman called for a vote on Alexander's proposal. One by one, the members cast their votes. The room was tense as the final tally was counted. By a margin, Alexander's proposal was accepted. He would remain as CEO, with a mandate to continue the community project, but with the understanding that it needed to demonstrate financial viability within a year. As the meeting adjourned, Alexander felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. He now had a year to prove that his vision of ethical, community-focused business could also be profitable. Victor approached Alexander as they were leaving the boardroom. "This isn't over, Reeves," he said in a low voice. "You've bought yourself a year, but when this little experiment of yours fails, I'll be there to pick up the pieces." Alexander met his gaze steadily. "Then I suggest you watch closely, Victor. You might learn something about the future of business." As Alexander left the building, he was met by a crowd of employees who had gathered outside, having heard about the board meeting. Among them, he saw Jake, Tommy, and Maria. The sight of them, his son, the boy who had started this journey, and the mother whose life had been changed, filled Alexander with renewed determination. He addressed the crowd, briefing them on the outcome of the meeting. "We have a year to prove that doing good and doing well can go hand in hand," he said. "It won't be easy, but I believe in what we're doing, and I believe in all of you." The crowd cheered, but Alexander knew that the real work was just beginning. He had a year to turn his vision into a sustainable reality, to prove that a company could prioritize social responsibility without sacrificing profitability. As he looked out at the faces of his employees and the community members who had come to support him, Alexander felt the weight of their hopes and expectations. But he also felt a sense of purpose and determination that he hadn't experienced in years. The conflict wasn't fully resolved. The specter of Victor's opposition and the looming deadline hung over Alexander's head. But he had won a crucial battle, earning the chance to see his vision through. Now it was time to turn that vision into reality, to show the world that compassion and capitalism could not only coexist but thrive together. With a deep breath, Alexander stepped forward, ready to begin the most challenging and important year of his life. The year following the contentious board meeting marked a turning point for Alexander, his company, and the community they were working to revitalize. With the clock ticking on his promise to demonstrate financial viability, Alexander threw himself into the work with renewed vigor and purpose. The first major change came in how the company approached the community project. Rather than viewing it as a separate, charitable endeavor, Alexander began integrating it into every aspect of the business. He created cross-functional teams, bringing together experts from different departments to tackle community issues. This not only led to more innovative solutions, but also helped employees feel more connected to the project. One of the most successful initiatives was a mentorship program that paired company executives with local entrepreneurs. This program, spearheaded by Jake, not only provided valuable guidance to community members starting businesses, but also gave company leaders a ground-level understanding of the challenges and opportunities in the area. Alexander also focused on transparent communication, both within the company and with the community. He instituted regular town hall meetings where employees and community members could voice concerns and suggest improvements. This open dialogue led to several breakthrough ideas, including a local supply chain initiative that reduced costs while boosting the local economy. As the months passed, the company began to see tangible results. The revitalized factory, now producing eco-friendly products designed with input from the community, started turning a profit. The microloan program, managed in partnership with local banks, saw a remarkably low default rate and began to attract outside investors. Perhaps most significantly, the company's efforts began to attract positive media attention. Stories of their innovative approach to corporate social responsibility went viral, leading to an uptick in socially conscious consumers seeking out their products. Halfway through the year, Alexander called another board meeting. This time, instead of defending his vision, he was able to present concrete results. Profits were up, employee satisfaction had skyrocketed, and the company's reputation had never been stronger. Victor Hargrove, who had been waiting for the project to fail, found himself increasingly isolated as other board members rallied behind Alexander's leadership. The turning point came when a major ethical investment fund approached the company, looking to make a significant investment based on their community-focused model. As the meeting concluded, the board voted unanimously to fully endorse Alexander's direction for the company. The one-year trial period was ended early, and Alexander was given a mandate to expand the community-focused model to other areas where the company operated. Walking out of the boardroom, Alexander felt a profound sense of vindication and purpose. He had not only saved his position, but had fundamentally changed the direction of the entire company. As he looked out over the city, he realized that this was just the beginning. The real work, scaling this model, refining it, and truly changing the face of corporate America, was still ahead. With a renewed sense of purpose, Alexander set out to take his vision to the next level, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the second anniversary of his fateful encounter with Tommy approached, Alexander found himself in a moment of quiet reflection. The man who looked back at him from the mirror was markedly different from the profit-driven CEO who had once walked through the park that evening. The past 2 years had been a crucible, testing his resolve, his leadership, and his values in ways he could never have anticipated. He had faced down corporate opposition, risked his career for his principles, and emerged not just successful, but as a catalyst for industry-wide change. Alexander's growth was evident in both his professional demeanor and his personal life. The cold, calculating businessman had been replaced by a leader who valued empathy and community impact as much as the bottom line. He spoke with a new kind of authority, his words carrying the weight of someone who had fought hard battles and emerged stronger for it. His relationship with Jake had blossomed into a true partnership. Father and son now worked side by side, with Jake bringing fresh ideas and a youthful perspective to the company's initiatives. Their shared purpose had healed old wounds, creating a bond stronger than Alexander had ever thought possible. "You know, Dad," Jake said during one of their strategy sessions, "I used to think business was all about making money, but you've shown me it can be so much more. We're actually making a difference in people's lives." Alexander smiled, feeling a surge of pride not in his own accomplishments, but in the man his son had become. "We are," he agreed, "and that's worth more than any amount of money in the bank." His newfound perspective had ripple effects beyond his immediate circle. Other companies began to take notice of Reeves Enterprises' success, and Alexander found himself being invited to speak at conferences and consult with other CEOs about implementing similar models. During one such conference, Alexander shared the stage with Victor Hargrove, who had since left Reeves Enterprises to start his own venture capital firm. The tension between them was palpable, but there was also a grudging respect. "I still think you're a bleeding heart, Reeves," Victor said during a panel discussion. "But I can't argue with your results. You've shown that doing good can be good for business." Alexander nodded, acknowledging the backhanded compliment. "It's not about being a bleeding heart, Victor. It's about understanding that business doesn't exist in a vacuum. When we lift up our communities, everyone benefits, including shareholders." As he left the stage, Alexander reflected on how far he'd come from the man who once measured success solely in profit margins. He now understood that true leadership wasn't about making the most money, but about making the most difference. Perhaps the most profound change was in Alexander's sense of purpose. The emptiness that had once gnawed at him, driving him to accumulate more wealth and power, had been filled by a deep sense of fulfillment. He woke up each day excited about the challenges ahead, knowing that his work was making a tangible difference in people's lives. As he prepared for a community meeting later that day, Alexander thought about Tommy, the boy whose tears had set this entire journey in motion. Tommy was now in high school, excelling in his studies and dreaming of medical school. Alexander had set up a scholarship fund in his name, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't stand in the way of Tommy's aspirations or those of other promising students from the community. Looking out over the city he had helped transform, Alexander felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, new communities to help, and a business model to refine and expand. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Reeves felt truly, profoundly successful. 5 years after that fateful evening in the park, Alexander stood on a stage, addressing a crowd of business leaders, community activists, and politicians. The occasion was the launch of a nationwide initiative for ethical business practices, with Reeves Enterprises leading the charge. As Alexander spoke about the journey that had brought them to this point, he emphasized the themes that had defined his story: the power of empathy, the importance of community, and the potential for business to be a force for positive change. "We stand here today not because change is easy," he said, his voice strong and clear, "but because it is necessary. We've shown that ethical business isn't just a moral imperative, it's good business. When we lift up our communities, we all prosper." Looking out at the diverse faces in the crowd, Alexander saw the ripple effects of his actions. Former skeptics now championed corporate social responsibility. Young entrepreneurs were entering the business world with a sense of purpose beyond profit, and communities once left behind were finding new pathways to prosperity. As he concluded his speech, Alexander caught sight of Tommy in the audience, now a young man preparing for college. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Alexander was transported back to the park bench where their journey began. "The work is far from over," he said, "but we've proven that change is possible. Let this be just the beginning of a new era in business, one where compassion and capitalism walk hand in hand." The applause that followed was more than just approval. It was a promise to continue the work Alexander had started, a commitment to a more equitable and compassionate future for all. In that moment, Alexander knew that his greatest success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives he had touched and the change he had inspired. The poor boy crying on a bench had not only changed his life, but had set in motion a transformation that would ripple out far beyond one man or one community.